Well, welcome to the Red Chair. Today we have a special guest, longtime friend, Tom Henriksson from OpenOcean VC, coming from Helsinki. Good to see you, Tom. Welcome to Lisbon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, after so many years that we've been, looking at things together. Tell me, who are you? What have you been doing in the last few decades? You've done incredible stuff, and you're a VC now, but you've done way more in the past as well.
Decades indeed, when you say it. Oh my goodness. So if I will stay very briefly in the 90s. So when I had studied in the early 90s, believe it or not.
Like me.
Like you. I don't think at that time anybody wanted to be a venture capitalist, right? I mean, nowadays, maybe some people in Stanford, when they grow up, they actually want to be VCs.
I didn't even know that this existed, right?
Exactly. And maybe some children of European VCs actually think that it could be cool, but probably not. Probably not. So definitely nobody ever had heard about venture capital. But during my MBA, I actually did a project for the only VC in Finland. This was in 1995.
Oh, interesting.
And I did a market analysis of actually software businesses, which we will get back to.
But there was already a VC in Helsinki at the time.
I think they were still a government organization at that time, but then privatized later.
Okay.
So, but it was interesting because I got this insight to software startups and what is all this thing and why is he investing in them and what's the whole idea. Didn't think much more about it because I had done some management consulting before my MBA, and my MBA I focused completely on becoming again a management consultant, a strategy consultant. But then during my MBA I actually did some startup projects with a couple of friends' company who were focusing on helping startups go international. So I did a couple of those projects with them, and then I ended up not taking the offers from the consulting firms, but actually going into one of my customers to be the export manager of this company.
So we actually have more things in common, because during my MBA, I did all I could to not go back to consulting, and I did not take the offers after the consulting.
Well, at least we both didn't take the offers. I guess that's why we're sitting here.
And I also found out during my MBA that I wanted to be a VC. That's right, and I specialized quite a lot in it. So, but it was a few years later, not many, but a good few years later.
Yeah. Okay, similarities. This we haven't even talked about before.
No,
interesting. So, and then I was at this, Finnish technology startup, not software but hardware, and they were the classical, I would call it European tech startup in the 90s, all about product and tech, very little about marketing and sales. I can't say I was able to contribute a lot, so I stayed there for a very short time and joined then back with my two friends who had this startup consultancy, where we at some point started helping our interesting clients raise funding from, among others, venture capitalists.
And where were those venture capitalists that you were
they were mainly local ones, but let's say Northern European, and there weren't that many, but there were some.
Not that many, yeah.
I remember one who actually never invested in our startups, but one that we had frequent dialogues with. I'm sure you will remember them, Alta Barkley.
Yes.
That they were a hot one in the 90s in London, right? Mm-hmm. So we did that and had so many good clients that we actually managed to make a little bit of profit in our business, which we then decided to start investing in startups ourselves. Mm-hmm. So first we set up...
Which year was this?
So 1999 we set up initially, and obviously these were the first maybe venture capital boom, or at least
in Europe,
in the more modern history, and in Europe indeed. We set up I think it was a 1 million euro fund that made 4 investments. And here I learned in practice. I had read in my MBA about portfolio theory, but here I learned in practice, because over a few years we actually lost all those companies, right? Okay. So the profits from the firm went into that fund and nothing came out of it. However,
lessons learned.
Very good lesson learned. The second fund, and you'll see it in the second fund, because at the same time as we were practicing doing this, we set up the structures for having a fund. So then we raised an external fund which was 52 million Finnmarks, about 9 million euros, with some semi-institutions and lots of privates. And that fund was the one that invested, among others, in MySQL. which is actually my link to the MySQL and OpenOcean stories,
Yes.
which we can come to.
Can you remind us what was, MySQL? How did it start? It changed. It had a dramatic effect in tech in general, and in certainly in the European tech.
It did, yes. So MySQL was, you could say, started by our partner, who's nowadays a partner emeritus, Monty Widenius, who developed the open source database, or developed the database that was a very efficiently packaged one, so that he actually could develop it over the internet with some other people in his small initial community.
Which year did MySQL start? Do you remember?
This is a good question. I mean, when did he actually start developing it?
Or when did you invest?
So he started developing it early 90s, 95, 96. It started to have quite a community following and so on. But so Monty, together with two Swedish people, then actually set up MySQL AB, the company. So it became a Swedish company with the core developer Monty in Finland. And then,
so despite the rivalry between Finland and Sweden,
despite our love-hate relationship, we collaborated nicely here. And then Monty used to play squash with another OpenOcean partner, Ralph. They had studied together. And when they played squash, or maybe after they had played squash, each time they would talk about the potential business of an open source software model. Because Monty had a quite large community of people who were helping develop the product and people who were using the product in their stacks, right?
Yeah, and open source was kind of starting to become a thing, right?
Late 90s, yes. And some people actually would send Monty checks, dollar bills and checks to keep the good work going, right?
This is a bit like the decentralized thing nowadays, right? Or in the last few years, it's kind of like a new way of looking at things. Like at the time, the open source as opposed to the closed source software, right?
Yeah. And of course, the whole open source movement has completely exploded since right, and changed all the IT infrastructure of large companies and all the internet giants and so on. But coming back and not wanting to stay too long here, but so when they played squash, they toyed with the idea of, can you make money on an open source company? And MySQL then ended up, and Ralph invested in MySQL as the angel. And then MySQL was the first open source business to actually monetize with the dual licensing scheme. So they figured out how you do that, how you make the enterprise pay so that the enterprise doesn't come under the open source rules when they include the software in their solution. And then it started taking off. Then in late 2000, they came to our venture capital firm. And they had just agreed to hire Morten Mikkos, an amazing guy, as the CEO. And the three of them came to our office, and fortunately we thought, there's a future in that. And we actually determined in our internal analysis that it might even become $100 million valued company.
Which
obviously it became then in 2008 $1 billion valued company, but we couldn't see that far in 2001. And we invested in it, and then the business really took off. And MySQL had, of course, I think up to 100 million or so downloads by the time of the exit. And it was very, very popular, and the internet, first generation of internet, was kind of built on MySQL as a part of the LAMP stack.
For sure. How was the exit? When did the exit happen, and how was it done?
So 2008 to Sun Microsystems. And it was an inbound from Sun, who had quite a big portfolio of open source solutions in their offering. So that was great, and it was just before the bad times of 2008 started, right? So suitably lucky timing there. However, then if you recall, Oracle bought Sun.
That's right.
And Oracle started constricting what you can do with MySQL. So that, and we can talk later about it further, but that actually was the impetus for starting the successor to MySQL, MariaDB.
Oh.
So then Ralph, Monty, and Patrick, who had been hired by Ralph into MySQL and ended up on the management team, so they started in 2010 MariaDB because there was a void in the market looking for a very open, great SQL open source database.
Precisely. And so you had that exit. You were still at the time with your fund, or how did it happen?
Good question. No, actually, there was a lot of things happened. So 2001, I invested in MySQL. Same year, we actually sold our business to an investment bank, which was going to go public and didn't. And then we eventually exited that investment bank. And then I spent 9 years at Nokia. Which was amazing. Very fortunate for me because Nokia was a truly global company. I learned a lot about management and leadership and international business during those 9 years.
So you think it's actually useful for many entrepreneurs to have gone through, a good solid big business to learn some of the processes, or not?
It's a good question. Depends a bit on the individual.
Or you think that's better for a VC?
Probably better on average for a VC, but depends on the individual. I mean, my focus within Nokia was never with the big handset business, though. I was on the new business area of Nokia, and there actually one of my teams started a mobile advertising business, a first generation mobile ad network, and then they convinced me to come and run it, and we grew it from $0 to $50 million in revenue in 3 years. Including a $150 million acquisition, which I'm sure was not a public figure, but it's now a long time ago, so I think we'll let that slip.
Exactly.
And that, of course, was as a startup and growth experience within a big company, cheating because I had brand and I had money like very few startups do.
And the network.
But it was, of course, an amazing way to see how you can grow something really fast.
And you were based in Finland?
I was based in Finland and after the acquisition in Boston. So that was where we bought N-Pocket from.
And so then you decided to leave Nokia?
Then I was actually head of corporate business development for a little while. I always said when I joined Nokia that I want to get back to VC someday. And this was my, training ground, if you will. And then Patrick, Monty, and Ralph had started both OpenOcean as a local seed investor, raising a fund, and they had started MariaDB.
Which year was this? 2011?
So this is 2010-ish, plus minus.
And what was the status of the Nordic VC market at the time?
Nordic or European? Very different from now, right? When OpenOcean was started, and the analysis might not have been perfect, but when I joined the board of OpenOcean, there was, for instance, a sentence saying that we know one VC in Germany. Okay, there were a few more, but it's exaggerating a little bit. It was very different from today, right?
Who was this VC that you knew?
It's a good question.
Do you remember?
Maybe Early Bird.
Early Bird, right? So, that's what I thought it would be.
Not Early Bird East yet, and I know you've been interviewing Cem here.
That's right. Cem is a good friend, but has his Christian Nagel from Early Bird. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So much less, but of course there were a few. Finland had like a handful, and Sweden had a handful, and so on. So there were a few VCs. I think the big difference for us, which is kind of reflected in our funds as well, our first fund was 2011, is that very few entrepreneurs in the first fund are serial entrepreneurs. So they were first timers. And then it probably takes a bit longer and you make a few more mistakes and it is harder. It's a very good fund. We ended up, it took 11-ish years before the fund got really profitable. Now it's at 3.4x DPI, so very good fund, and there's still one good company. So very happy that happened, but it took much longer than we thought. So because we had seen the MySQL journey and the world keeps speeding up, so we thought it would go a bit
faster, but not necessarily.
In years 7, 8, 9, you could see that there were a few companies that were really at scale, and we ended up at now the end with 3 companies with $100 to $200 million or euros in revenue and profitable.
Yeah.
all which had almost no revenue when we started. I mean, clearly below $1 million and so on. So we always knew it was going to be good based on the companies. But then at what quantum and when,
right,
you will only find out later.
It takes some time.
But
so
it took much longer than we thought.
There were a few VCs at the time. And what about, the Nordics are always seen as an incredible hotbed for innovation and, I'd say on par with Germany and the UK has, the driving force of the European tech ecosystem. And particularly for fairly small countries in terms of population, it's always very impressive. Why do you think that has been the case on the last decade and a half, 2 decades?
Yeah. I will qualify that, by the way, with we were founded at OpenOcean with the premise that great kind of technical software innovation can and will come from anywhere in Europe.
As we are seeing.
And we've seen that happen, right? So we are quite Europe democratic in our view. Of course, the Nordic countries have had a very good education, strong in STEM, fairly high actually investments also by government and so on into R&D and supporting the research and development of companies, etc., etc. So there's, I'm sure, a number of factors that have helped.
It's interesting that you mentioned government intervention. Was the government intervention primarily in R&D, or were they doing, say, direct investments in companies?
Yeah. So much more in R&D per se. Of course, Finland does have, and we've had in every fund, we've had Finnish industry investment.
So investing in funds.
So Finnish industry investment, which is government-owned companies' privatization proceeds that are being refunneled for, I'm sure, many purposes, but through Finnish industry investment, TESI, as they're known. Primarily into funds, but they also do some directs. So in certain special situations or areas and so on. But mainly in funds.
And you'd say it's more or less the same across the Nordics. This has been more or less the case, right? Very strong education, very innovative, product-driven founders.
Absolutely. Then of course it's been clusterizing, right? I mean, the whole good old Porter cluster theories and competitive advantages of areas and nations and so on. And I guess it is really true that when you start building competencies and success in some area, it will be a self-reinforcing circle or a virtuous circle. And in the Nordics, I mean, both Sweden and Finland, we obviously have great gaming companies, right? The last 10 plus years has created lots of gaming. First few companies and then lots of talent and now lots of companies as well. Sweden has often been good in consumer companies. Mm-hmm. Also our biggest win so far, Truecaller, which was the largest tech IPO in Stockholm ever. They are a consumer-facing company with some B2B business under. But Sweden is really good in consumer experiences and services. And I could go on the other Nordic countries. I will just finish by saying that in B2B, which we are focused on, the Nordics, and maybe even a little bit leaning more toward Finland, there are a lot of companies that are very good at analytics-related things in various verticals and areas.
And have you found that it was, these founders that were successful in the last 10 years, did they restart new companies? Did they invest directly? Did they invest in funds? Did they launch funds? Well, there's a little bit of everything.
All of the above, right?
All of the above.
And of course, a fantastic Nordic. Sweden, of course, has Daniel Ek and Spotify, who's an amazing example of a successful entrepreneur who then commits to put lots of money back in the ecosystem. In Finland, we have Supercell's Ilkka Paananen and Mikko Kodisoja. I mean,
and they've done all that as well, right?
They have a really impressive, very large family office that primarily puts its money to work into startups and venture firms and this ecosystem, which I think is wonderful, and because
directly
the effects
and
are
also in funds, in local and
both,
international funds.
Both.
Yeah.
So Supercell, as far as I know, and I'm no expert on Supercell because I said no to Supercell actually as my first investment case on the table when I joined OpenOcean from Nokia in April 2011.
You said no to Supercell.
On Monday, Nenad from Nokia Capital pinged me that, hey Tom, great that you're back in venture. Here's a case that I'm looking at, and I'm very sorry, Nenad, if you hear this, and I shouldn't say it. And that was Supercell because he knew Ilkka from Digital Chocolate before.
Nenad is a good friend, so he'll excuse us.
we hope so. And I would need a local co-investor to look at it. I think by Wednesday I said no, we don't do games. It's not B2B. We have no idea about what makes a game click. Yeah. So it was the wrong case for us, but obviously, in a way, it would have been a nice one.
It would be nice.
On the other hand, Axel put in a lot of money at a good term, and I don't think OpenOcean would ever have competed with that, even if we would have understood games.
Yes.
But anyway, so Ilkka, I think he's really like the example of how you are proud of the education you got, how you're happy to pay taxes back to the country that provided you with a great upbringing and base, and then invests actively back into the ecosystem to make more successes happen. I was actually, now I'm on a tangent, so Supercell, if I understand it correctly, does the games investments. They have an area a team that invests in games. And then the other areas are the ones that Ilkka's and the others family office.
But it's a good example, right? Sort of coming back to your country, because we see sometimes a lot of founders, and sometimes even here in Portugal, they'll do well, but then invest in other countries, which is fine as well. But I mean, you should also sort of be grateful to the system that enabled you to sort of become what you are.
Having said that, of course, somebody like Ilkka, I mean, he has access to the whole world, so I'm not saying they're only investing in Finland. Of
course, invest globally. And so what is the status today with OpenOcean, and what do you look for? How's the market? How do you see you invest globally, at least all over Europe for sure? Yeah. What's your view? It's
actually similar to the beginnings, right? I mean, we had done MySQL, and now we've also done the MariaDB story built that to scale and to exit. So and I had my Nokia mobile ad business experience. So learning from those, the mission is really to help European entrepreneurs complete similar journeys. They're never the same journeys, but you can learn some things, and you need to be super agile and adapt a lot because the markets and everything changes almost constantly nowadays, right? So same mission. The ground is much more fertile. So we look for A round, European originated, deep data rich B2B software companies that typically have a product on the market. When we started, there were maybe hundreds of those in Europe per year. Nowadays, we see at least 2,500 a year of just such companies, right? So the ground is much richer in volume. There are serial entrepreneurs who've done at least a journey like this before, so they can get more things done more quickly. And there are obviously actually these amazing European stories also in this area, the UiPaths and Colibras and all kinds of companies that actually have shown that you can not only be a European leader, but a global category leader and do something really big, even exit-wise. So it's a very, very different market, but we still want to help in a similar way. We, of course, have learned a lot during our venture journey as well.
Of course, we all do. And so you're here in Portugal, you've been many times, we've spoken about many opportunities together. What's your view on the Portuguese ecosystem and also on the Iberian landscape, not only Portugal but Spain as well?
Sadly, we haven't invested yet in Portugal. We have invested once in Spain. And last year we were actually very close with a computer vision company in Portugal very close. Not going to name names here, but we liked it a lot. Great team, great traction, great technology, but we ended up not investing. So we will someday, no doubt, no doubt. Portugal is, of course, like Finland, a fairly small market. So it means that, there won't be tens of $10 billion B2B software companies coming out of Portugal in the short term. But you probably have punched a little bit above your weight there. You do have a number of really impressive companies here, right?
Quite a good number of unicorns.
OutSystems and Feedzai, and you have Unbubble and a bunch of really nice B2B companies. So I can only say, I wish I would have invested in at least one of those.
Yes, no, we've been very fortunate. We have quite a few unicorns, 6 actually, with an Indico imprint. So after all these years of investing and being close to entrepreneurs, are there things that you think entrepreneurs should really do or not do?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure there's so many, right? But I'll try to just focus on a couple of ones. The one that always baffles me is, it's the same when we raise funds from LPs for our funds. You should never cold call them. You should never cold email them. You should always get somebody who they trust to introduce you, or somehow get your brand, your information above the line, so to say. It's the same with entrepreneurs when they look for money from us. If they don't know us, if they don't get a warm introduction, yes, we actually look at everything coming in, but the likelihood of picking that one out of the 1,500 that just come in through some digital channels is so low. So why don't you make sure you get that warm introduction? Because then I will at least take it very seriously.
Yes, it would also show that the entrepreneur has that, street smarts to actually get there in a special way, right?
Exactly. And they will do the same when they get to a customer, right? They will open the door to the customer.
Right? I mean, I'm always baffled when people say, oh, but the entrepreneurs don't know how to reach you. I'm like, what do you mean they don't know how to reach me? It's just, there's many ways of reaching.
Exactly.
And there's also many ways of knowing who are the best funds and so on. So if they don't know, it's because they probably don't.
I mean, in the tech world, the 6 degrees of separation theory is 3 degrees.
Yes.
If you just
everything is it's a small industry at the end of the day. Exactly. And things that, you've seen very successful entrepreneurs, of course. Is there anything they have in common, or several things they have in common?
And that one is a really tough one, right? Because if I knew it, I would be a better investor.
But in hindsight,
and there are books that have been written about it where they, from very large data sets, try to distill that. And actually, just read a really interesting one by one of the partners at DCVC, who claims to have the biggest data set of successful companies and companies in general. And one of the myths that we hear, right, is that you should have 3 or 2, for instance, co-founders. He proved in his data set that it's more or less the same likelihood to be successful if you're 1, 2, or 3 founders. So, that's a hard question. One that I think might be true, because we like to find entrepreneurs that are world-class at least something. Often it's technical, but you need to be really good at something, and that, of course, needs to be a part of the essence of your company. It is maybe the inspiration and the spark for creating that long-term sustainable advantage that your company will have. But you need to be world-class at something. So we invest in these kinds of companies that have these kinds of entrepreneurs. That doesn't mean that you're good at many things or everything.
Right. You have to have that special thing on the tech side.
So that is one. We always try to identify that. Then, of course, the good entrepreneurs from that beginning quite quickly build out their leadership teams with complementary skills, be it functional, be it the blind spots they have, be it the stuff they don't know or need to know to succeed in their target market.
That's even harder to find, right?
And it's people even harder to find, but I would claim that at least all are really successful companies MySQL, MariaDB, our own companies, also my ad business back in the days, which grew fast, Truecaller, some of our other at-scale
They all
companies like
built incredible
Supermetrics and
teams.
Booksy and so on. They all are quite quickly extremely diverse in experience, background, skills, and so on. So, I hope
At least
it
those two things.
is the data that proves that this is how you should go about it.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. It was great to see you in Lisbon. I think we're going to have an amazing dinner.
We will.
And
I look forward to that.
And I look forward to seeing you in Slush in Helsinki.
And we will be back in Lisbon.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you.